I didn't hear.
That's a very good thing. That could have been really bad.
Oh, I'll be right back. I gotta get myself some water.
God. Yeah. Oh, definitely. God. I think I'm gonna make Japanese curry for my lunch tomorrow. I think I have Vermont spicy. I think I have Vermont red curry sitting in my pantry.
Hello, Janland. Hold on, I can fix this.
Oh God.
I'll do
Hi,
this.
Janlin.
Lummox, you really do sound like you sound like a drunk who's had a really bad night out. Just with how exhausted you sound.
Right.
Oh my God. Ah, Christ.
Alright, then I add browser source. No. Window capture. No, not that capture. This one.
No, it'd be a good bit of fun for voice acting practice again. Maybe do that.
Oh, stop it. That's just a video
What?
of a fireplace over my, like, terribly, like, drawn fireplace. Honestly, it doesn't look bad.
Yeah.
Alright, well, I'm gonna leave you guys. Thank you for hanging out with me for a minute.
It's okay. I'll probably be lurking in your stream for a little bit.
Oh, thank you. I'm gonna turn on my stream avatars and I'm gonna start my reading before it gets too late. Anyway, talk to you later.
Talk to you later, Lummox.
Bye. Hello. Welcome. It is I, your humble host, for this story time. Thank you for the pets. No, I will not sleep. I miss streaming. Why did you skip Beta Furry Day? I wasn't around. I was working. I didn't skip it. I was beating my furry on that. No. Anyway. So we're reading a short story from chapter 7 of Fazbear Frights. Five Nights at Freddy's short stories. I wanted to beat Marcus up for your entertainment. Well, that's awfully nice of you, but that's fine. He beats himself up all the time. Thank you for the oop. Give me a moment. I'm starting up stream avatars for you. Oh, what? Oh, that's not supposed to happen. Is that a real fake fire? Yes. It was a real fake fire, but something happened. I don't know what happened. Oh, there it goes. Yes, that is a fake fireplace with a real fire. Hi, how are you, Cyclone? I missed you guys. Or it got me depressed. Boy, I just got interested in going where I gotta take the train for an hour. Yeah, tell if it fits with the rules. To be honest, this is a real fire. It's live. It is a live fireplace video. It's an actual thing on YouTube. It is currently still running, as you can see down. I don't know. As you can see down here, it is live. Whoops. There we go. Now that you have said it, not good. I was so looking forward to work tomorrow so much that when you said how I was, I am now I'm not looking forward to it. I never look forward to work, but I have to work 5/12, so I have a reason. But anyway, I hope work is well for you at least, like works. Let's just, can we all just simultaneously agree work just sucks? Like washing paint dry. Alright, well anyway, thank you guys for joining. This is a story called The Breaking Wheel. I hate him. Reed whispered through gritted teeth. From across the aisle of desks, Shelley blew long, dark bangs from her forehead, glanced at the back of Julius's head, and then rolled her eyes at Reed. Tell me something I don't know. Reed looked at her sideways. Just say it. Julius, as usual, had been bragging about his talents, and then he'd start complaining. Typical Julius. He was either telling everyone how he was better than they were, or he was trying to blame his problems on someone else. Too often, Reed had been on the receiving end of that blame, along with the physical bullying that came with it. You need to ignore him, Shelley said. As if, Reed hissed. He's the world's biggest... Did you have something to add to Julius's observations? Miss Billings asked Reed. Miss Billings was the perfect teacher for this class. Small and compact, a plain face generally devoid of emotion. The head of their robotic class moved in jerky, precise movements that had sparked more than one conversation about whether she was an advanced robot herself. The first week of class, Shelley's twin brother and Reed's other best friend, Pickle, had posited, who better to teach robotics than AI? Pickle was convinced Miss Billings was an android. For weeks he'd been devising a plan to prove his hypothesis, because so far the plan involved cutting into Miss Billings. Shelley wouldn't let Pickle go forward with it. So what was under the teacher's pale skin was still a mystery. Reed tipped his chair forward and sat up straight at his desk. In response to Miss Billings' question, he said, no? Reed couldn't add to Julius's observation because he hadn't heard them. All he heard when Julius talked was the jerk's loud, nasally twang. Julius never said anything you wanted to hear anyway. He only spoke in insults, complaints, or brags. Miss Billings left her cool, blue-eyed gaze on Reed long enough for him to start squirming before she shifted her attention back to the class as a whole. She flipped her long, wavy blonde hair off her shoulder as she spoke. So let's talk about Julius's concern. What could Dilbert do to prevent his remote from affecting Julius's exosuit? Reed knew the class discussion was going to be a refresh of IR versus RF remotes. And since it had bored him the first time, he decided not to listen a second time. Besides, it wouldn't matter how much he listened. At this point in the semester, he knew he was going to crash and burn on his project in spite of whatever he learned or didn't learn. Reed looked at the mid-sized, partially constructed exoskeleton sitting on his desk. He'd been working on it since Miss Billings assigned their spring semester project, but it looked like he just started because he seemed to have missed too many pertinent information in all the class lectures. He tried to use the textbook to help him fill in the blanks, but he didn't completely understand it. When Miss Billings had first introduced the concept of exoskeletons, she'd defined them as crude frames that could be attached to other things for adding mobility. She then explained how that could be expanded upon if the frame's power sources could add enough functionality to control the wearer. That's what had given him his great project idea. He'd intended to make something to fit over his little sister Alexa's extremely annoying baby doll. He thought it would be cool to make the little doll scare sister, a classic brotherly prank, but his vision at this point wasn't likely to become a reality. Shelly and Pickle had their projects over halfway done before Reed had gotten to even a tenth of the way through his, and now they were both finished, a couple weeks before the project was due. Admittedly, Pickle's robot was puny, about the size of a small remote-controlled car. Just a vaguely man-shaped small metal skeleton with not a lot of personality. Pickle's robot wasn't much to look at, but his robot had mad abilities. With his tricked-out custom remote, he could practically make the thing breakdance. Shelly's robot was similar, but dog-shaped instead of a man-shape. It was the size of a Labrador. Thales, who was named after some man Shelley said was the first scientist, living between 624 BC and 545 BC. Thales Miletus was an ancient Greek dude who did a lot of science and mathematics stuff. Ray could remember the guy's name and when he lived, but for some reason he couldn't remember anything Shelley had said the guy did. Not that any of it mattered. What mattered was that Shelley's robot was supposed to mimic a well-behaved dog. And from what Reed could tell, she could probably win a dog show with the thing. She was going to get an A like she always did. Why'd he let the twins talk him into taking this class anyway? Sure, they were his best friends, but what did make him a science nerd like that? But that didn't make him a science nerd like them. Reed was into computers, but not as they related to robotics. He wanted to combine his love for fiction with his aptitude for programming to become a game designer. He wasn't an engineer, and he sucked at building things. Shelly and Pickle knew this. After all, Shelly was the one who couldn't let a year go by without reminding him of his complete ineptitude, going all the way back to the building blocks they played with when they were 5 years old. They were freshmen now, and yet Shelly got the giggles every science medal and his historical event diorama assigned to them. Every one of Reed's construction efforts reminded her of the log cabin 5-year-old Reed had built. A cabin that looked less like a cabin and more like the aftermath of an explosion. But in spite of that good-natured ribbing, he knew Shelly hadn't talked him into this class just so she could laugh at him. And as for Pickle, he was too uninterested in others' shortcomings to orchestrate Reed's simulation. "It's fun when we take classes together," Shelly had said to Reed when he signed up. Pickle had grunted what could have been agreement or a non-committal disinterest. The truth was that Reed would do pretty much anything Shelly wanted him to do. They were friends, and they'd been friends for too long for her to think of him as anything but a friend. But he spent more time than he'd ever admit thinking about what it would be like if he and Shelly were more than friends. But after almost 10 years, the idea was still what his dad would call a castle in the sky. Damn, this is combining my biggest weakness. The fact that I don't know shit about it, I am terrible at paying attention when I'm being told something, and the fact that I keep getting distracted. Right. But maybe it wasn't. Sometimes when he talked to Shelly, she'd look at him with something like admiration, as if she was considering him in a different light. Take the cliche castle in the sky, for instance. One day, when Pickle, Reed, and Shelly were getting off the bus, Shelly was talking about wanting something that was impossible. Reed had spotted clouds that looked exactly like a castle. He'd pointed at the castle-shaped clouds and said to Shelly, "Look, a castle in the sky." That means impossible dreams can happen, even if it's in another dimension. He was just messing around, but Shelley said, "Actually, you're right," and she squinted at him like he'd suddenly gotten interesting. Ray looked over at Shelley now, her attention on Miss Billy. Shelley was chewing on the ends of her thick black hair. She wore it in a meticulously chin-length style, which put the ends right at mouth level. She always chewed on her hair when she was concentrating. It was one of the few little imperfections she noticed about her, and just like all her other imperfections, it was hopelessly charming. Nah, he didn't think Shelley and Pickle wanted him to humiliate himself for their amusement, but that was mean, and they weren't mean. Maybe they were a little thoughtless sometimes, because they'd get wrapped up in their books and their projects and forget to act like normal kids. But they weren't mean. Now, Julius, he was mean. A vanilla cookie? Yeah, sure. I need a drink. Thank you for the stretch. That's better. Now, Julius, he was mean. Reed shot a dirty look at the artful blonde waves cascading down the back of Julius's head. Shelley once told Ray that Julius's hair was dreamy, even though she admitted his personality was somewhere between detestable and execrable. The latter word, among others, taught Reed to never again buy her a Word of the Day calendar for her birthday. Why does he have to use an RF remote? Julius whined to Miss Billings. I don't want his stupid remote to be telling my exoskeleton what to do. My ears, Reed thought. When Julius whined, his voice climbed an octave, and he sounded like a frightened weasel with a head cold. Who cared about the dreamy hair? Makes me gag, Reed thought. And who cared that Julius was tall and muscular, and shallow girls who rated boys on looks and or money instead of character thought he was a stud? Julius' voice told listeners everything they needed to know about him. He was a sniveling weasel who acted like an ass so people wouldn't notice all that sniveling weaseliness. All the expensive clothes Julius wore didn't cover his essential weaselly identity either. No amount of skinny black jeans, gazillion-dollar basketball shoes, designer skirts, shirts, or cashmere scarves could disguise a true weasel. Ray looked at the dangling metal foot of Julius's gangly exoskeleton, which hung off the right side of Julius's desk. Julius's project was a skeletal suit he intended to wear, a collection of metal frameworks attached to mechanical joints at the shoulders, elbows, hips, and knees. Julius's exosuit had leather straps and metal clamps that would hold the contraption in place on Julius's body. He'd been bragging that it would make him even faster and stronger than he already was. Whatever. Ray thought exosuits looked a little like scaffolding. Well, what a race of tiny people might create to attach to a human body so they could climb up and repair it. Reed wished Julius' suit was scaffolding, and there was a race of tiny people who could fix Julius, who was certainly in need of repair. Dilbert, Miss Billings said. Pickle looked up. His real name was Dilbert, but his family and close friends called him Pickle, a play on Dill. Can you explain the class your reasoning for using an RF remote? Sure, but not just using an RF remote. I'm using the RF as an IR extender. I want my remote to be effective through walls. Pickle sniffed. I don't think the problem is my remote anyway. I've achieved my goal with my remote. If he hasn't achieved his goal, isn't it up to him to make adjustments? Why doesn't he? Pickle pointed at Julius. Install an RFI filter in his signal path. Or he could change his frequency. Or he could check the macros. He may have them programmed too close to mine. Pickle sniffed again. He didn't have a cold. He was just a perpetual sniffer. Short and dark like his twin sister, Pickle unfortunately didn't get his sister's looks. Shelley was really pretty. It was just that no one other than Reed seemed to notice it because she was so intense. Or maybe it had to do with the baggy button-down shirt she always wore with her jeans. You can do whatever you want, alright? Pickle, on the other hand, would never be called pretty. With unusually deep-set eyes and nearly blackout unibrow, a long nose, and a strangely small mouth filled with crooked teeth, Pickle's looks weren't going to open doors for him. He was going to have to rely on his smarts to get him through life. Thankfully, he had plenty of those. Pickle narrowed his eyes at Julius to deliver the killing blow. He might have even stolen my macros. I did not, Julius erupted. The sound came out as a cross between a honk and a screech. Thank you for the nut. Julius crossed his arms. Miss Billings pushed a button on her own remote. A remote that controlled at least a dozen robotic creations in the room. Robotic arms attached to a monkey holding symbols flung the symbols out and smashed them back together. The metallic clang created a hush in the classroom. Julius crossed his arms and sulked, but he didn't whine anymore. Everyone else was still. After 5 seconds, Miss Billings said calmly in her flat, even tone, "Delbert makes excellent points, Julius. I suggest you attempt to implement some modification strategies of your own. Successful robotics aren't about getting others to make changes so your creation functions properly. We live in a world filled with RF signals. You're going to have a problem solve the issue using the techniques and knowledge you've learned in this class." Reed grinned at Julius's red ear. Smackdown! Ha! Oh, if you come with your phrasing, anything I want is including a lot of things. Whatever. Reed looked around the room to see if anyone else was enjoying Julius's embarrassment as much as he was. His gaze landed on Leah, a curvy girl with round glasses whom Reed had admired for much of the year. No one ever wanted to talk to her, but her happy demeanor and self-confidence were unshakable. Leah noticed Reed's gaze, and she winked at him. Whether or not the wink was shared enjoyment of Julius's discomfort was unclear, but Reed smiled at her anyway. The rest of the 15 kids in the class didn't look towards either Julius or Reed. They were all either fiddling with their projects or looking at Miss Billings. Figures. This class wasn't exactly a cross-section of the normal freshmen, except for Julius, who was an odd combination of jock, brain, and bully. Everyone else in the room could have been in the running for Geek of the Year, if there was such a contest. Even if English was not one of them. Well, I mean, you can do whatever you feel. Just, I don't know. Just do whatever. I don't care. Where was I? There were more glasses, bad haircuts, and mismatched clothes in this room than in the rest of the school combined. Robotics class might as well be called Misfits class. Now, Miss Billy said, if there are no other questions or complaints. No one said a word. No one moved. Good. Miss Billy stood and stepped over to the whiteboard. Let's move on to a deeper discussion of actuators. I understand some of you are having problems there, so what are the 4 common types we talked about last week? Shelley's hand shot up. Reed suppressed a grin. Shelley had never met a question she didn't want to answer, and for some reason he always enjoyed seeing her small square hand with its bit into the nub fingernail stuck up in the air, vibrating with eagerness. Her excitement was audible through the beaded bracelets she liked to wear. They clacked together while she waved for Miss Billings to call on her. Yes, Shelley? Electric motors, solenoids, hydraulic systems, and pneumatic systems. Excellent. While she wrote Shelley's answer on the blackboard with her right hand, Miss Billings pressed another button on the remote in her left hand. A small spider-shaped skeleton crawled up the inside wall of the classroom and stuck a light bulb-shaped sticker on the row next to Shelley's name, which was on a huge chart that included all the class's name. Shelley had more stickers than anyone else. Reed had none. Actually, on a question of 0 out of 100, how tired am I? I'm at like an 80, 85, but that's steadily increasing. Maybe like a 75, but it's going up. Where was I? Reed turned away from the stupid chart and looked out the window at the tiny pale green buds on the oak trees outside the school. He wondered if he could see the buds getting bigger if he stared at them long enough. Watching trees grow had to be more interesting than this stuff. One of Miss Billings' robotic characters started marching up and down each row between the desks. The exoskeleton was vaguely shaped like a horse. Its hoof-like feet clopped against the gray linoleum floor as it pranced past Reed's dirty athletic shoes. Reed was pretty sure the robot was modeling an example of a hydraulic actuator, but maybe it was pneumatic. He probably should have been paying more attention. Horse, I hear horse. Give me. How did Miss Billings expect anyone to pay attention in this room full of animated characters, exoskeletons, and robotic parts? It was sensory overload, like having class in a circus. On top of that, even though Miss Billings wore conservative pantsuits, she obviously loved the color red, which was splashed all over the school's instinctual pale yellow walls in the form of huge posters and a myriad of charts. It was distracting. A wadded up piece of paper landed on Reed's desk next to his pathetic exoskeleton. He blinked and glanced at Miss Billings. She had her back to the class, so he spread out the paper. It was a note from Shelley. Coming home with us? Long homework session, followed by a smiley face. Shelley thought long homework sessions were fun. He looked at Shelley. She was watching Miss Billings, but she nodded when Reed gave her a thumbs up. Not that he wanted to do homework, but he wanted to go home with his friends. And besides, he had to do homework. At least when he studied with Shelley and Pickle, he got better grades. As soon as Miss Billings dismissed the class, Pickle grabbed his robot and jumped up. He did this every day because he was the last class before lunch. Pickle loved to eat. That was the only other thing he had going for him. Pickle ate more than Shelley and Reed combined, and he didn't have much more meat on him than his metal exoskeletal robot did. The boy had the metabolism of a hummingbird. Today, Pickle was in an even bigger hurry. Today was a half day because all the teachers had some conference to go to. After school activities had been canceled. There would be no late buses. The principal had announced that morning that the school would be closed and locked at noon. This meant Pickle and, of course, Shelley and Reed were in for an afternoon of the great snacks Miss Gerard put out for the twins and their little brother, Ori, on special days like this. Even on normal days, stuff like homemade pizzas, veggie egg rolls, and grilled sandwiches were typical after-school eats at the Gerard house. But on special days, Mrs. Gerard went over the top. Pickle, Shelley, and their little brother, Ori, were beyond lucky. Their mom was home to make them hot food in the afternoon and then another great meal later in the evening. Reed was lucky if he could scrounge up a few pretzels when he had to go home to his empty house. Luckily, he usually got to go home with the twins. If he didn't, he'd have to have been even skinnier than he was. Pickle started trotting up the aisle towards the door as Reed picked up his project and tried to figure out how to shove it into his backpack. He didn't take his eyes off of Pickle as he folded and refolded the project's robotic arms. So he saw when Julius stuck out his foot and tripped Pickle. Pickle, who wasn't the most coordinated kid anyway, lost his balance and flew forward into the desk in front of Julius. Pickle's big nose led the way wherever his face went, so his nose took the brunt of the impact when it hit the corner of the desk. Blood spurted from Pickle's nostrils as Julius snorted out a high-pitched laugh. Miss Billings, who had been gathering a stack of books and prepared to leave the room, didn't see a thing. Neither did anyone else. Everyone was too focused on where they were going. Even Shelley had her head down as she collapsed her dog-sized exoskeleton into a puppy-sized one. This was a particularly clever part of her project, we thought. She'd told him if she could figure out how to downsize Dales too, without hurting him, of course. She'd patent collapsible dogs and become a billionaire. Reed's muscles bunched as he watched his friend try to stop the spurting blood with one hand. Reed wanted to help Pickle, and he wanted to confront Julius, but he knew where it would lead if he put himself in the middle. As if reading Reed's mind, Julius turned and smiled. Julius's unusually pointed canine teeth seemed to gleam under the classroom's fluorescent lighting. Not for the first time, Reed fantasized that Julius was a vampire who could be vaporized by a stake through the heart. If Julius had a heart. Reed clenched his fist as Pickle ran from the room, clutching his robot with one hand and the bloody nose with the other. Before Reed could tell Shelley what had just happened, she got her act together and hurried after Pickle, calling, "Pickle, wait up!" Julius gave Reed the evil eye for another few seconds. Then he turned to gather up his floppy exoskeleton. Then he turned to pick up his floppy exoskeleton. All the other kids filed out of the room. Reed lingered. He wanted to say something to Julius. What was it Shelley had called Julius the other day when they were talking about him? Oh, yeah. She said he was an big words. Ignominious, odious reprobate. Reed mentally repeated the words. They sounded ridiculous. Only Shelley could get away with saying something like that. What are you staring at? Julius asked Reed. Reed looked around. He realized he and Julius were alone in the room. He hated that his palms had started sweating and his breathing was coming faster. Why did he let Julius get to him? Slow and steady does it, Lomax. I know. Julius stopped trying to gather up his suit. Instead, he carefully laid it out. He grinned at Reed. Bet you wish you could build something like this, huh, moron? Reed didn't answer. He wanted to pick up his backpack and leave, but something kept him in the room. What? He didn't know. And sure it wasn't the company, which sucked. It wasn't the decor, which he found intimidating. And it wasn't the smell, which was a cross between chalk and soldering. I don't even know what you're doing in this class. Julius sneered. I mean, your runty little friend may be a mini freak, but at least he has a few brain cells. And your other friend, that weird hair-chewing chick, is an uppity cow. But with a little makeup, she wouldn't be bad to look at. And she has brain cells too. You got nothing going for you. You're a freak, and nothing can make you worth looking at. And on top of that, you're all air up there, aren't you? Julius leaned forward and flicked a finger between Reed's eyes. Reed tightened his fist, and Julius noticed. What are you going to do, hit me? Didn't you see what I did to your pickle friend? Julius laughed his beyond annoying laugh. I didn't even have to lift a finger. I just moved my foot, and now he's a bloody nose. Just think of what I could do to you without giving it much effort. Reed swallowed. Julius had just called Reed an ugly, stupid freak, and yet Reed was still standing there as if he couldn't talk. Reed hated being called a freak, and he hated being called ugly. Yeah, Reed was a bit of an outcast. When his mom had died, he hadn't seen the point in trying to get along with anyone. He'd separated himself from his friends, using his overwhelming grief as the fence to erect a barrier between himself and the world. Only Pickle and Shelley had bothered to climb that fence. And no, Reed wasn't much to look at. The truth was, he was unlike Pickle in the looks department. Skinny with unusually long arms, his pronounced brow rigid and jutting jaw gave him more of an ape-like appearance than he wanted to admit. More than once, Julius called him Monkey Face when he was younger. Now that his dad had let him grow his curly brown hair long, he was able to disguise his primate features a little. If only he had an ape's strength. He still wanted to say something to Julius. No, forget saying something. He wanted to do something, but he couldn't. Why did he think things would be any different in high school than they had been in grade school? Julius looked at his exoskeleton. See this here? I was going to use it to become strong, use it to be stronger and faster. But I don't need to be stronger and faster. I'm already strong and fast. I figured out a better use. I'm going to get this thing working perfectly. I'm going to hold you down and put you in it. Then I'll control the exoskeleton and it will make you do whatever I command it to do. You'll have to be my servant. I'm going to make you wait on me all day long. You'll carry my books, tie my shoes, get me my food, clean up after me. I'm even going to make you dance for me. What do you think about that, loser? Would you like to dance like a monkey for me? Reed still didn't speak. It was like he'd been turned to stone. All I could do was stand there and watch Julius lean over and tinker with his exoskeleton. Julius looked up and laughed at Reed. Cat got your tongue? Julius lifted up his exoskeleton suit. Want to see it in action? It's pretty amazing if I do say so myself. Julius began fitting the suit to his long limbs and V-shaped torso. The metal shell lay over Julius's limbs. A shoulder strap, chest strap, and hip strap, along with clamps at the wrists and ankles, kept everything in place. Reed, biting the inside of his cheek hard enough to draw blood, remained rooted to the spot, watching. Outside the classroom, students laughed and called to each other as they headed to the buses lined up outside the school. Inside the classroom, it was nearly silent, except for the clicks and snaps of Julius fitting himself into his robotic skeleton. See here? Julius held up his arms. He indicated his wrists, then pointed to his ankles. I have equipped the exoskeleton with a locking mechanism, so once I get you in it, I can keep you in it. Reed watched Julius struggle with some of the joints of his exoskeleton. Julius shifted the framework on his body and adjusted the suit's piston cylinders. Outside, a couple buses started their engines, and a baritone rumbling vibrated the walls of the school. If Reed didn't leave soon, he'd have to walk to the Gerard's house. He'd have to walk over 7 miles, all because he stood here like a paralyzed mute for the last several minutes. He shook his head to try and get his brain rebooted. Julius, heavy with the exoskeleton riding his body, leaned down and fiddled with the wires leading to the skeleton's circuits. Reed wished he had the guts to reach out and shove Julius across the room, him and his stupid exoskeleton. But it's a good thing he didn't. A second later, Reed was glad he wasn't touching Julius. A radiant flash burst up like fireworks as a power surge sparked into the exoskeleton. Julius's body twitched. His eyes widened. He went rigid for several seconds. And in those seconds, Reed's mind bizarrely thought of the previous days worth the day. Shelley shared every one of them with him. He forgot most of them, but he remembered fulgurant, which meant flashing like lightning. That power surge was fulgurant, he thought. With curiosity for what was going to happen next, Reed watched the stiffness leave Julius's body. Julius wavered on his feet, lost his balance, and fell back onto his desk, shaking his head. He groped for his chair and slid into it. Brain fart. Shaking his head, he groped for his chair and slid into it. He put his head down, and for what felt like a long 20 seconds, Julius was perfectly still. Was he alive? Reed blinked and studied Julius's inert form. Then Reed's gaze landed on the wrist and ankle joints of the suit. Finally, Reed moved, stepping over to Julius. Reed quickly locked the wrist and ankle joints. They fitted together with a satisfying snick. As soon as they did, Reed stepped back and grinned. That would teach the ignominious, odious reprobate. Reed picked up the backpack and slung it over his shoulder. He watched as Julius opened his eyes. It took a second for him to get oriented, but when he did, he attempted to strip off the exoskeleton. Oops, Reed said. He bucked back toward the classroom door. He finally found his voice. I must have locked you in. My bad. Julius jerked his arms, seeking to free them from the restraints of his skeletal suit. He kicked his legs with his right hand. He grabbed at the exoskeleton, tugging his left hand. He grunted and strained. The skeleton wouldn't budge. What the hell did you do, punk? Julius yelled. Unlock me! I don't think so, Reed said. Do what I tell you! Unlock me! Julius's face was just a mottled mix of red and purple, and his eyes looked like they were bulging out of his head. Spittle clung to the corners of his mouth. Reed shrugged and grinned. He couldn't remember the last time he was this pleased with himself. Not that he thought through what he was doing. What was the point of what he'd just done? Was he just messing with Julius, or was he going to leave Julius in the suit overnight? Could he do that? Why not? He'd get in trouble was why not. Julius would tell the teachers what Reed did. But all Reed would have to do was deny it. And if he made sure Julius was unlocked by morning, why would anyone suspect Reed of anything? Everyone knew he was pretty much a wuss. No one would ever believe he had the courage to do this. Unlock me! Julius commanded again. The muscles in his neck stood out like cords. His jaw jutted, and he kept opening and closing his fists. At this point, Reed really had no choice but to leave Julius here all night. If he let Julius out now, Julius was going to beat the crap out of him. Even if he unlocked Julius and ran, Reed probably wouldn't outrun the guy. Julius was crazy fast, and Reed was an athletic spaz. If he waited until morning, there would be enough people around that Julius wouldn't touch him. The decision basically made itself. Julius was going to be locked in overnight. The idea Boyd, B-U-O-Y, sorry, give me a moment.
Nut.
Nut. Let's see. B U O Y-E-D.
Boomed.
Bund?
Boomed.
Buond.
Boomed.
Bund.
Boomed. 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 Boomed.
Boond. Boon. There's
Boomed.
Boond.
Boomed.
Boond. I don't understand. I don't know. Paying attention. I apologize. You're fine. Don't worry about it. Anyway. The idea of Boone it reads so much he felt like he was floating. Buoyed? I don't know. I'm going to do you a favor, Reed said, happy that he had something clever to say. I'm going to leave you here in your suit overnight so you can get an idea what it feels like to have someone treat you the way you treat everyone else. Maybe your robot could teach you a thing or two. Hey! Julius tried to get up, but his exoskeleton was contracted and stiff. It was acting like a full-body cast, keeping Julius' body locked in a seated position. Have fun, Reed called as he sprinted from the room. Before he left the classroom, he shut off the lights. Get back here, you stupid ape! Julius screamed. Do you know what you've done? I'm going to kill you! The last few words came out as a nearly unintelligible screech as Reed pulled the door closed. Julius began bellowing. I'm going to rip your head off and flush it down the toilet! I'm going to tear you apart limb from limb! Get back here and unlock this! Reed laughed. For some reason, Julius's threats, which normally would have reduced Reed to quivering jelly, sounded funny. For once, Julius had no power. Reed had it all. Reed looked around the empty hallway. He was alone. Good. This whole wing was probably empty by now. As an auxiliary hall near the back of the school, it wasn't used outside of class hours. No one would find Julius, even if he yelled his head off. Come back here and let me out of this thing, Julius screamed. You can't leave me in here like this! Reed grinned. Then he turned her and ran through the school, hoping he wasn't too late to catch his bus. Because Mr. Johnson, the bus driver, was always looking out for him, Reed didn't miss his bus. He made a total fool himself, waving his arms around and shouting as Mr. Johnson started pulling away from the curb, but he got the driver's attention. Mr. Johnson stopped the bus a few feet from the curb and opened the bus's doors. The driver of one of the buses further down the road behind Reed's bus honked. Stumbling up the stairs into the bus, Reed gasped. Thanks to Mr. Johnson, he shook his hairy-haired head and winked at Reed. Cutting it close, my boy. Cutting it close. Reed sucked in some air. Sorry. Life happens, Mr. Johnson said. We adjust, he smiled at Reed. Take your seat. Reed scanned the interior of the bus. One of the cheerleaders gave him a disgusted look. Reed ignored her and looked for Shelly and Pickle. He knew they'd be at the back of the bus, and he knew they'd save him a seat. Keeping his gaze on his feet in the aisle's scuffed rubber flooring, Reed hurried to his friends. He slid in next to Pickle. As soon as Reed's butt hit the hard maroon vinyl seat, Mr. Johnson released the brakes. The bus hissed, lurched, and rumbled away from the school. Reed looked at Pickle's nose. It was hard not to. Red and swollen, smeared with blood, Pickle's nose was more prominent than ever. And now he had little white tissue rolls sticking out of each nostril. Given that his nose was beaky, Pickle looked like a big bird sucking up white worms. Does it hurt? Reed asked. Pickle, as usual, was doing some kind of numbers puzzle. He glanced up at Reed. Huh? Reed pointed at his nose. Pickle made a funny cross-eyed face in an attempt to look at his injured beak. Reed suppressed a smile. Pickle shrugged. Yeah, not the first time, though. Oh, hold on. Yeah, not the first time, though. I can ignore it. Sorry. Why? What did you do? Nothing. Pickle returned to his puzzle. Reed glanced at Shelly. She was reading also as usual. The bus smelled like diesel exhaust, sweat, peanuts, and bubblegum. Its engine sounded like the contented snore of a sleeping dragon. The sound helped tension and adrenaline drain from Reed's system. The bus gained speed as it turned out of the school's driveway onto the road. Reed looked out the window. The high school was tucked into the back of an older neighborhood, so the first few blocks after they left the school were full of big trees and pretty green lawns. Reed usually liked looking at all the greenery. He would stare at the lawns with envy. His front yard was mostly dirt. Today, Reed wasn't really seeing anything he was looking at. He was back in the robotics classroom with Julius. His mind was focused on Julius locked into his exoskeleton. Julius's face nearly purple with rage. In the Dark Ages, Shelley said, harsh torture was commonly used to punish those who broke the law. Reed flinched. What? He turned to stare at Shelley. As always, she sat in the seat behind Pickle and Reed. Her massive backpack and extra book bag took up the rest of the seat. Did she know what he'd done? Her attention on her book, Shelley continued. When someone violated civil law, torture would be done in the town square. Public display of the consequences for lawlessness was thought to be a deterrent. Oh, she was reading. Of course she was. She loved to share what she was learning. And she often read aloud on the bus, and at home, and at lunch, and in the hallways at school. She read pretty much everywhere. Today she was reading her history homework. Shelley was in AP World History because she'd read so many history books outside of school that she was beyond the normal history curriculum. She wasn't just a science geek, she was an information geek. Reed relaxed his shoulders and returned his attention to the window. Without left behind the neighborhood, the bus route ran along a main drag line with strip malls and car dealerships. Reed liked the stretch too because he enjoyed looking at the cars. He liked to imagine himself driving them, and he picked a different make and model every day. Concentrating, he put himself at the wheel of a new, bright yellow Mustang. Shelley's voice, however, ruined his fantasy. Tortures were very creative in the Middle Ages, Shelley read. They came up with truly morbid ways of inflicting excruciating pain. The Judas Cradle, for example, impaled a seated victim for several days, with blood-curdling names like the Beast Ripper and the Pearl of Anguish, or Pair of Anguish. Medieval torture devices were a testament to human ingenuity. Torture. Was what I did to Julius torture? Reed's chest tightened. Yeah, it probably was. Being stuck was at least a mild form of torture, especially in an exoskeleton with no way to move or eat or drink or get to the bathroom. It wasn't the Judas Cradle, but it wasn't nice either. After the malls and car lots, the bus route wound through an industrial park, and then it passed a farm before turning into a newer subdivision. Most of the bus's stops were in the subdivision, which was stuffed full of houses that, though good size, mostly looked alike. Reed didn't care about the houses, so he stopped registering individual things. Now he just saw blurs of color, and Julius stuck in that metal framework. Reed's dad, who did his best, the best he could to be a single dad to Reed and his sister, Alexa, was fond of saying that you couldn't solve a problem at the level of your problem. Solve a problem at the level of the problem. Reed wasn't a genius like his friends, but he was smart enough to know that meant lowering himself to the level of Julius's meanness wasn't the way to handle the jerk. But still, after what Julius did to Pickle, wasn't that justification enough to lock Julius into the exoskeleton he was so proud of? And what about what Julius said to Reed about locking Reed in the exoskeleton? Didn't Julius deserve to get a taste of his own medicine? Reed started to unwind his muscles again. Yeah, what he did wasn't so bad. It was justice. The bus went through a pothole and everyone popped off of their seat for a nanosecond. When they all landed again, Shelley poked Reed's shoulder. He turned to look at her. Listen to this, she said. You won't believe it. What? Reed asked. Pickle said nothing. He kept inking in the answers to his puzzle. One of the most commonly used forms of torture was called the wheel. Shelley read from her thick, musty-smelling book. Those condemned to being constrained in this way had prolonged torture ahead of them. They were held in place, unable to free themselves. Reed stared at Shelley. What was she doing? Was she messing with him? Held in place, unable to free themselves? It sounded like she was talking about Julius. Maybe she knew what he'd done after all, but how? It was something sometimes called the breaking wheel. Shelley read on. Reed blew out air. Marcus sucks. Yeah, you go. 0. Reed blew out air. No, she didn't know what he'd done. It was just a coincidence. She was reading about torture devices. They called it that, she continued, because it was used to crush the bones of the condemned. Bruh. Ew. Huh? Shelley looked at Reed with wide eyes. Then she returned her gaze to the book and read on. The device was designed for torture lasting over multiple days. The wheel was made up of many radial spokes, and the person subjected to it was tied to the wheel whole whale before a club or cudgel was used to beat their limbs. This process reduced the human being into a mutilated bag of bones. What one onlooker describes as the writhing, moaning monster with bloody tentacles. That's gross, Pickle. Oh, hold on. That's gross, Pickle said without looking up from his puzzle. Totally, Reed agreed. He tried not to think about what Julius was experiencing now. But hey, at least Julius wasn't tied to a medieval torture device, right? Julius was restrained, and as time passed, he'd be uncomfortable, but he wasn't in any pain. No one was standing over him beating him with the cudgel, whatever that was. He was just trapped. Shelley continued to read about medieval torture, but Reed tuned her out. He turned back toward the window. The bus was stopped at a corner. He watched Mom. Thank you for the nut. The bus was stopped at a corner, and he watched a mom holding hands with a little kid who held a red balloon. The balloon bobbed in the air, following the little kid's movements because it was tied to the kid's wrists. Ray thought about Julius's big wrists. Maybe he should go back to the school and unlock the exoskeleton after their study session this evening. A few hours would be enough to punish Julius for his nastiness. That way, Julius would learn his lesson, but Reed wouldn't stoop to the level of torture. Yeah, that's what Reed would do. Except, how would he get away from Julius before Julius tried to kill him? Reed chewed on his lower lip. He sat up straight and smiled. He knew what he could do. He'd unlock just one of Julius's hands, then jump back and run before Julius could grab him. Julius, stiff from his confinement, would take at least half a minute to unlock his other wrists and his ankles. And in that time, Reed could get far enough away to hide. Once Julius was gone, Reed could go home. And after that, well, he'll deal with that when the time came. But until then, he was going to have some good food at the Gerard's house and hang out with his friends. He was going to put Julius out of his mind and enjoy the rest of his free time that day. He deserved it. Just like Julius deserved what was happening to him. And that is where we're going to pause it. I'm tired. Well, this was part 1 of small stream. What happens next? Does Reed go free Julius? I'll have to find out tomorrow. I'll talk to you guys later. Thank you for joining me. It's short stream, but I gotta work in the night. So I will enjoy reading to you another time.